The fragrant aroma of freshly baked pastries and brewing coffee filled the cozy interior of Rosie's Corner Cafe, a charming establishment tucked away on a quiet street in Chicago's North Side. Early morning sunlight streamed through the large front windows, catching dust particles dancing in the air as an elderly woman with silver hair, pulled back in a neat bun, methodically wiped down the tables. Her movements were careful but efficient, the kind of precise rhythm developed through years of similar work, though the slight stoop of her shoulders and the occasional wince when she bent too quickly betrayed her advancing age. Jonathan Roumie pushed open the door to the cafe, the little bell above jingling to announce his arrival, seeking a quiet place to enjoy breakfast before heading to a charity event later that morning. The actor had returned to Chicago for a few days, the city where he had spent part of his childhood, to participate in a Catholic youth conference and visit some old haunts that held special memories. He chose a small table by the window, running his hand absently over his beard as he surveyed the quaint establishment with appreciation for its unpretentious charm. As he settled into his seat, Jonathan's attention was drawn to the elderly cleaning woman making her way between tables with practiced precision. There was something hauntingly familiar about her profile, about the way she hummed softly to herself as she worked, about the careful attention she paid to each surface. His brow furrowed slightly as he tried to place her, a nagging sense of recognition tugging at his memory, connecting him to moments long buried in his childhood past. The woman turned, and for a brief moment their eyes met across the room, her warm brown eyes widening with a flash of puzzlement before she quickly looked away, returning to her work with renewed focus. That glimpse was all Jonathan needed. In an instant, he was transported back to his childhood home, to bedtime stories read in a gentle voice, to skinned knees tended with loving care, to the safety and comfort provided by the woman who had been his nanny for several formative years, when his parents' demanding work schedules had required additional help at home. "Mrs. Abernathy?" he called out softly, almost hesitantly, not wanting to startle her, but unable to contain the sudden wave of emotion that swept through him at the recognition. The elderly woman froze, cloth still pressed against the table she was cleaning, her back to him now, but her posture betraying her reaction to hearing her name. Slowly she turned, squinting slightly as she studied his face, the momentary confusion in her expression gradually giving way to astonished recognition. "Little Johnny Roumie?" she whispered, her voice catching slightly as she pressed her cleaning cloth to her chest. "My goodness, is that really you?" Her hands trembled slightly as she took a hesitant step toward his table, eyes scanning his adult features for traces of the boy she had once cared for. "You look so much like your father now, but with your mother's eyes, I'd know those eyes anywhere." Jonathan stood immediately, closing the distance between them, with quick strides and enveloping her in a gentle embrace, mindful of her fragile frame, yet unable to contain the surge of affection he felt. "Mrs. Abernathy, I can't believe it's you," he said, his voice thick with emotion as memories cascaded through his mind. Her famous chocolate chip cookies that always seemed to appear when he was sad, the lullabies she sang when nightmares woke him, the patient way she had taught him to tie his shoes with stories about bunny ears going around trees. The cafe's other patrons glanced curiously at the unexpected reunion unfolding before them, the famous actor embracing the elderly cleaning lady with such obvious affection. Mrs. Abernathy pulled back slightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears as she patted his cheek with a work-worn hand. "Look at you," she said softly, wonderingly. "All grown up and a big star now. I've seen you in that Jesus show. I tell everyone who'll listen that I used to change your diapers." Jonathan laughed, a warm, genuine sound that filled the space between them. "Well, I hope you don't share too many embarrassing details," he teased gently, before his expression grew more serious. "But Mrs. Abernathy, what are you doing here?" He gestured around the cafe, at the cleaning supplies, at her worn uniform with the cafe's logo embroidered on the pocket. "You must be, 75 now? Surely you should be retired enjoying your grandchildren, not cleaning tables at a cafe." A shadow passed across Mrs. Abernathy's face, her smile dimming slightly as she straightened her apron with dignity. 76 next month, actually, she corrected him mildly. And retirement is a luxury some of us can't afford, Johnny. She glanced around nervously, lowering her voice. I shouldn't be chatting during work hours. My break isn't for another hour, and Mr. Sullivan runs a tight ship. The fear of reprimand in her eyes, so at odds with the confident authority figure of his childhood memories, sent a jolt through Jonathan's heart. Please, join me for a few minutes, Jonathan insisted, gesturing to the chair across from his. I'll speak to Mr. Sullivan if necessary. Surely he can spare you for a short break to catch up with an old friend. His gentle persistence won out, as Mrs. Ward Abernathy hesitantly set down her cleaning supplies and lowered herself into the chair with a barely suppressed sigh of relief that spoke volumes about the aches in her aging body. It's so wonderful to see you, Johnny, she said, reaching across to pat his hand affectionately, the old nickname flowing naturally from her lips, despite the famous man who sat before her now. Or should I call you Jonathan? I suppose you probably outgrew Johnny many years ago. Her eyes crinkled with genuine warmth as she studied him, pride evident in her gaze. I always knew you'd do something special with your life. You had such a big imagination, always putting on little shows for me and your stuffed animals. Jonathan smiled at the memory, shaking his head slightly. You can call me Johnny. It's actually nice to hear it again from someone who knew me before all of this. He gestured vaguely, encompassing his career and public persona with a sweep of his hand. But please, tell me about you, he urged, leaning forward with sincere interest. What happened after you left our family? Last I remember, you were going to move to Florida to help care for your sister. Mrs. Abernathy's hands fidgeted slightly with her napkin as she nodded, memories clearly playing across her expressive face. I did move to Florida for a while. Clara needed help after her stroke. She confirmed. I stayed with her until she passed about 5 years after I left your family. She paused, a flicker of old grief crossing her features. After that, I came back to Chicago, where my son Michael was living with his family. But then the recession hit in 2008, and everything changed. As she spoke, Jonathan flagged down a waitress and ordered coffee for them both, ignoring Mrs. Abernathy's protest that she couldn't accept. Michael lost his job at the factory, then his house, she continued, her voice lower now, dignity evident in the straightening of her shoulders despite the painful story. They moved in with me for a while, but my little pension wasn't enough to support everyone. By the time things started improving, my retirement savings were gone. And then my health took a turn. Medical bills, you know how it is. Jonathan listened intently, his heart growing heavier with each new detail of hardship that had befallen this woman, who had once been such a source of stability and comfort in his young life. I started cleaning houses again in my 60s. It was work I knew how to do well. Mrs. Abernathy explained matter-of-factly, without self-pity. Then when my arthritis got worse, I found this job here at Rosie's. 5 days a week, opening shift, cleaning and helping with prep before the morning rush. And your family? Jonathan asked gently, trying to reconcile the warm stories she had once told him about her children, with her current situation, working a physically demanding job well past retirement age. Michael and his wife moved to Wisconsin for work about 10 years ago, she replied, a flicker of something like resigned hurt crossing her face. They check in when they can, but they have their own struggles. My daughter Emma lives in California with her husband, doing well, but that's a long way away. Their coffee arrived and Mrs. Abernathy wrapped her work-worn hands gratefully around the warm mug. I have 4 beautiful grandchildren though, she continued, her expression brightening. I've got their pictures right here. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, well-worn photo wallet, carefully extracting several slightly faded photographs that she clearly treasured. This is Michael Jr. He's in college now, can you believe it? And these are Emma's girls, Sophie and Abigail, and her boy, James. The pride in her voice as she spoke of her grandchildren was unmistakable, though Jonathan couldn't help but notice the undercurrent of sadness, the physical distance that separated her from these beloved family members. When was the last time you saw them in person? He asked carefully, watching her expression. Mrs. Abernathy's smile dimmed slightly as she tucked the photos carefully back into her wallet. Emma brought the children for Christmas 3 years ago, she answered quietly. With flights being so expensive and everyone so busy, well, we talk on the phone when we can. Jonathan felt a growing sense of purpose as he pieced together Mrs. Abernathy's situation. The woman who had bandaged his knees, dried his tears, and defended him fiercely when neighborhood bullies had teased him was now struggling to make ends meet in her 70s, separated from her family, performing physical labor that clearly took a toll on her aging body. "Mrs. Abernathy," he began carefully, "is there anything I can—" "Don't you dare, Johnny Roumie," she interrupted firmly, her eyes suddenly sharp with the familiar authority he remembered from childhood. "I didn't tell you all this for charity. I've managed just fine on my own all these years." The flash of her old strength was so reminiscent of his childhood that Jonathan couldn't help but smile, even as he recognized the fierce pride that had clearly sustained her through difficult times. "I'm just so happy to see the fine man you've become," she added more gently. "That's gift enough for me today." Their conversation was interrupted by a thin, nervous-looking man approaching their table with a tight smile. "Mrs. Abernathy," he said, his tone professionally polite but with an underlying edge. "Your break isn't scheduled for another 45 minutes. His eyes flicked to Jonathan, widening slightly with recognition before he composed his features. "Though of course, we're happy to accommodate our celebrities when they visit Rosie's Corner Cafe," he added with a forced chuckle. "Mr. Sullivan," Mrs. Abernathy said, immediately rising from her seat with an apologetic glance at Jonathan. "I'm sorry, I was just catching up with an old friend." There was something in her hasty compliance, the way her shoulders hunched slightly forward, that sparked a protective instinct in Jonathan. "Actually, Mr. Sullivan," he interjected smoothly, standing and extending his hand to the manager. "Mrs. Abernathy was my nanny when I was a child. I practically ambushed her when I recognized her, so the interruption to her work schedule is entirely my fault." Mr. Sullivan's demeanor shifted immediately, his handshake overly enthusiastic as celebrity recognition fully registered. "Jonathan Roumie, such an honor to have you at Rosie's," he gushed, his earlier strictness toward Mrs. Abernathy seemingly forgotten. "No trouble at all, no trouble whatsoever. In fact, why don't you take your full break now, Mrs. Abernathy? 15 minutes, on the house." The man's transparent shift in attitude didn't escape Jonathan's notice, nor did the way Mrs. Abernathy's eyes lowered slightly, a lifetime of knowing her place keeping her from commenting on the obvious double standard. As Mr. Sullivan walked away after several more effusive comments about being a huge fan of Jonathan's work, Mrs. Abernathy settled back into her chair with a small sigh. "I'm sorry about that," she said quietly. "He's not a bad boss, really, just very particular about schedules and procedures." Jonathan could see her discomfort at having been the center of workplace attention, at having rules bent on her behalf, and he skillfully steered their conversation to happier topics. Memories of the games they used to play, the stories she used to tell, the small traditions that had made his childhood special. Their 15 minutes passed far too quickly, and when Mrs. Abernathy reluctantly stood to return to work, Jonathan made a quick decision. "I'm in town for a few more days," he said, pulling out his wallet and extracting a business card. "This has my personal number on it. Would you have dinner with me tomorrow night? Nothing fancy. Just a chance to catch up properly without you having to worry about getting back to work." He could see her hesitation, the internal debate playing across her features. "Please," he added softly. "It would mean so much to me." Mrs. Abernathy finally nodded, carefully tucking the card into her pocket as though it were made of precious material rather than simple cardstock. "I'd like that, Johnny," she admitted with a small smile. "I finish work at 4 tomorrow." With a gentle pat to his cheek, a gesture so familiar it transported him instantly back to childhood, she picked up her cleaning supplies and returned to her work, the professional mask slipping back into place as she resumed her duties with practiced efficiency. Jonathan remained at the cafe longer than he'd planned, ordering a full breakfast and leaving a generous tip, all while observing Mrs. Abernathy as she went about her work. Each time she bent to pick up something from the floor, each wince as she reached to clean a high shelf, each careful navigation around customers reinforced his growing conviction that something needed to change. By the time he left for his charity event, a plan was already forming in his mind. Not charity, which he knew she would reject, but something that would honor both her dignity and their shared history. That evening in his hotel room, Jonathan made several phone calls, first to his financial advisor, then to his agent to rearrange some upcoming commitments, and finally to a realtor in Chicago whom a friend had recommended. The decisions he was making were significant, but as he thought of Mrs. Abernathy's still cleaning tables well into her 70s, separated from her family and struggling to make ends meet, he felt a deep certainty that this was exactly what he was meant to do with the resources his career had provided. The following evening, Jonathan arrived at Rosie's Corner Cafe precisely at 4 o'clock, watching through the window as Mrs. Abernathy hung up her apron, collected her worn purse from a back room, and bid goodbye to her co-workers. When she emerged onto the sidewalk, he was struck by how small she seemed outside the context of work, diminished somehow, her shoulders slumped with the fatigue of a long day on her feet, yet still carrying herself with the quiet dignity he remembered from his childhood. "I thought we might walk, if that's all right with you?" Jonathan suggested after greeting her warmly. "There's a nice little Italian place about 3 blocks from here, unless that's too far." He was careful to phrase it as a consideration of distance, rather than a comment on her age or stamina, respecting the pride he knew ran deep in her character. Mrs. Abernathy smiled, nodding her agreement. "That sounds lovely, Johnny. These old legs still work just fine for a few blocks." As they walked, Mrs. Abernathy's steps seemed to grow lighter, her posture straightening as she pointed out changes to the neighborhood, sharing anecdotes about buildings that had come and gone during her decades in Chicago. "That used to be the best bakery in the city, right there," she said, indicating what was now a chain coffee shop. Mr. Petrovich would save day-old bread for young families who were struggling, never made a fuss about it, just slipped extra into their bags when they came in. Jonathan listened attentively, struck by how much history resided in this woman's memories, how many lives she had touched and been touched by throughout her long life. "You remember when you taught me to tie my shoes?" he asked as they waited at a crosswalk. "You made up that whole story about the bunny going around the tree and down the hole." Mrs. Abernathy laughed, the sound brightening her entire face. "You were so determined to do it yourself, but those little fingers just couldn't get the coordination right. We practiced every day for 2 weeks." At the restaurant, a warm, family-owned establishment with red checkered tablecloths and candles in wine bottles, they were seated in a quiet corner booth. Jonathan watched as Mrs. Abernathy's eyes widened at the prices on the menu, her fingers fidgeting nervously with the napkin in her lap. "Order whatever you like," he said gently. "This is my treat, to thank you for all those meals you cooked for me when I was too picky to appreciate them properly." Over plates of pasta and glasses of wine, their conversation flowed easily between past and present. Mrs. Abernathy shared stories of Jonathan's childhood antics that made him laugh until his sides hurt, his brief phase of insisting on wearing superhero pajamas under his regular clothes in case of emergencies, his elaborate imaginary friend named Mr. Whiskers who had very specific dietary requirements, his tendency to hide behind furniture when visitors came because he was practicing to be invisible. In turn, Jonathan told her about his journey into acting, the years of struggle and rejection before his breakthrough, and the profound impact of portraying Jesus in The Chosen. "It changed me," he admitted, twirling pasta thoughtfully on his fork. "Not just professionally, but personally. It deepened my faith, made me think more seriously about how I'm using the platform I've been given." Mrs. Abernathy nodded, reaching across to pat his hand. "I always knew God had special plans for you, Johnny. Even when you were little, there was something in your heart, a goodness, a sensitivity to others that was remarkable." As they lingered over dessert, tiramisu that Mrs. Abernathy declared was almost as good as my grandmother's recipe, Jonathan carefully steered the conversation toward her current living situation. "Tell me about where you're staying now," he prompted gently. "Are you still in the same apartment you had when I was little?" The question seemed innocent enough, but he watched her reaction carefully, noting the slight tension that appeared in her shoulders. "Oh no, that place was much too big after the children grew up," she replied, setting down her fork. "I'm in a little studio apartment now, over on Westmore Street. It's small, but it suits me fine. Just enough room for my books and a few keepsakes." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "The neighborhood isn't what it used to be, but the rent is affordable, and the bus stop is right on the corner for getting to work." Jonathan nodded, hearing the unspoken details beneath her carefully worded description. The downsizing necessitated by financial constraints, the likely safety concerns in a neighborhood she was tactfully describing as not what it used to be, the reliance on public transportation regardless of weather conditions or early morning work schedules. "And your health?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. "You mentioned arthritis yesterday." Mrs. Abernathy waved a hand dismissively, though Jonathan didn't miss the stiffness in her movements. "Just the usual complaints of getting older," she insisted. "The arthritis acts up in damp weather and my blood pressure needs watching, but I take my pills and keep moving. That's the secret, you know, not to let age make you sit still." Her cheerful tone couldn't quite mask the reality that he'd observed at the cafe, the physical toll that hours of cleaning and standing took on her aging body. As the evening drew to a close, Jonathan insisted on calling a car service to take Mrs. Abernathy home, rather than having her navigate public transportation after dark. "This has been such a gift," she told him warmly as they waited outside the restaurant for the car to arrive. "Seeing you all grown up, successful, and still the sweet boy I remember." Her eyes glistened slightly in the streetlight. "I have a box of photos at home, some from when you were little. If you'd like, I could bring them to the cafe sometime." "I'd love that," Jonathan replied sincerely, "but I was hoping we might meet again before I leave town. Are you free for lunch the day after tomorrow?" When Mrs. Abernathy hesitated, mentioning her work schedule, Jonathan added, "I could speak with Mr. Sullivan if that would help. I get the impression he might be flexible for a celebrity request." He rolled his eyes slightly, drawing a chuckle from Mrs. Abernathy at the reference to her manager's obvious starstruck behavior. "I suppose I could ask for a longer lunch break," she conceded as the car pulled up to the curb. "Though I don't want to create problems at work." The slight worry in her tone spoke volumes about job security concerns that someone her age shouldn't have to carry. "Don't worry about that," Jonathan assured her. "I'll make sure it's all taken care of. And Mrs. Abernathy," he added as she prepared to enter the car, "thank you for everything. Not just tonight, but all those years ago. You made more of a difference than you know." After watching the car pull away, Jonathan walked several blocks in the cool evening air, his mind working through the details of what he had set in motion earlier that day. The calls he had made, the arrangements being put into place, the adjustments to his own finances, all of it felt right, felt necessary. Mrs. Abernathy had given him security, comfort, and love during a formative period of his childhood when his parents' busy careers had often kept them away from home. Now, it was his turn to ensure she had the security and comfort she deserved in her later years. The following day was filled with Jonathan's previously scheduled appearances: the Catholic Youth Conference where he spoke about faith and vocation, a hospital visit to a children's ward, and meetings with local charity organizations where his foundation had provided support. Throughout it all, though, his thoughts kept returning to Mrs. Abernathy and the stark contrast between the comfort and security she had provided in his childhood and her current circumstances. Between commitments, Jonathan made time for a brief meeting with the realtor he had contacted, reviewing details of several properties and making a final selection based on location, accessibility, and proximity to amenities. "The paperwork can be expedited, as you requested," the realtor assured him, clearly impressed by both the celebrity client and the generous cash offer that eliminated the usual financing delays. "We should be able to close within the week." Later that afternoon, Jonathan made another stop, this one to a furniture store where he selected comfortable, high-quality pieces designed with seniors in mind, arranging for delivery and setup in 2 days' time. The sales associate seemed confused by the rush timeline and specific requirements, But Jonathan's certainty and the substantial sale smoothed over any hesitations. Everything must be in place by Thursday afternoon, he emphasized as he reviewed the delivery details. It's extremely important. That evening, Jonathan made one more critical phone call, this one to Emma Abernathy Wilson in California, having obtained her number through resources his assistant had quietly researched. "Hello, Emma? You don't know me, but I'm Jonathan Roumie," he began when she answered. "Your mother was my nanny when I was a child." There was a pause on the other end of the line, followed by a surprised exclamation of recognition. "The actor? From that Jesus show my mom's always talking about?" "That's right," Jonathan confirmed, settling into his hotel room chair for what he anticipated would be an important conversation. "I ran into your mother yesterday. She's working as a cleaner at a cafe here in Chicago." He could hear Emma's sigh on the other end of the line. "She won't stop working, no matter how much we try to help," Emma said, a note of frustrated concern in her voice. "Mom's always been stubborn that way. Doesn't want to be a burden, is how she puts it. Though we've told her a million times that family helps family." "That's actually why I'm calling," Jonathan explained, outlining what he had observed about Mrs. Abernathy's situation and the plan he had set in motion. "I'd like your family's cooperation, not financially," he clarified quickly, "but in making this work in a way that respects your mother's dignity while ensuring she's properly taken care of." As he shared the details of his arrangement, Emma's initial skepticism gave way to emotional gratitude, her voice breaking slightly as she responded. "We've been so worried about her," Emma admitted, "especially since Mom refuses to move to California or Wisconsin to be closer to any of us. She's lived in Chicago her whole life, says she's too old to start over somewhere new, even to be near family." There was a pause before Emma added more quietly, "And the truth is neither Michael nor I have houses big enough to comfortably accommodate her, not with our kids and everything. The guilt of that? It's been hard." "This isn't about guilt," Jonathan assured her gently. "This is about honoring someone who made a profound difference in my life when I was too young to fully appreciate it. Your mother provided safety, consistency, and love when my parents were building their careers. What I'm proposing is just paying forward that gift in a way that I hope maintains her independence while removing the financial pressures forcing her to work well past retirement age." By the end of the call, plans were in place for Emma to fly to Chicago that weekend, a flight Jonathan insisted on covering to help with the final phase of his plan. "I can't thank you enough," Emma said, audible tears in her voice. "Not just for what you're doing for Mom, but for seeing her. Really seeing her worth when so many people her age become invisible in our society." The words resonated deeply with Jonathan, reminding him of how clearly Mrs. Abernathy had seen him as a child. His needs, his fears, his potential, when even his well-intentioned parents had sometimes been too distracted to truly notice. The following day, when Mrs. Abernathy arrived for their lunch meeting, Jonathan was waiting outside the cafe with a car service already arranged. "I thought we might go somewhere special today," he explained, opening the door for her with a mysterious smile. "Do you trust me, Mrs. Abernathy?" The echo of a phrase she had often used with him as a child, "Do you trust me, Johnny?" when introducing new foods or experiences, wasn't lost on either of them, bringing a warm smile to her face as she nodded. "Always did, always will." The driver took them to a quiet residential neighborhood about 20 minutes from the cafe, an area with tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and a small park visible from the corner. Mrs. Abernathy looked out the window with curiosity as they pulled up in front of a charming two-bedroom condominium building with a wide covered entrance and a small but beautifully maintained garden area. "What a lovely place," she commented. "Are we meeting someone here?" "In a manner of speaking," Jonathan replied cryptically as he helped her from the car, offering his arm as they approached the entrance. The building featured an elevator, a detail Jonathan had specifically sought out, which they took to the second floor. As they walked down the hallway, Mrs. Abernathy's confusion was evident, though she followed along with the patient trust she had always shown him, even when he was an imaginative child with sometimes outlandish ideas. Jonathan stopped in front of apartment 2B, reaching into his pocket and extracting a key which he held out to Mrs. Abernathy. "This is for you," he said simply, watching her face as confusion gave way to dawning comprehension. "What do you mean?" she asked cautiously, making no move to take the key from his outstretched hand. "Johnny, what have you done?" There was a note of apprehension in her voice, as though she suspected what was happening, but couldn't quite believe it. "I'd like to show you something, if that's okay," Jonathan replied gently, using the key himself to unlock the door, when Mrs. Abernathy still made no move to take it. He pushed the door open, gesturing for her to enter first, watching as she hesitantly stepped into the apartment, and then stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth at what she saw before her. The space was filled with natural light from large windows, tastefully furnished with comfortable, high-quality pieces, and, most strikingly, decorated with several items she recognized immediately. "That's my mother's rocking chair," Mrs. Abernathy whispered, stepping toward the familiar piece that now sat beside the window, overlooking a small garden below. "And those are my books." She turned to Jonathan, confusion and the beginning of tears evident in her eyes. "How? Why?" The question seemed to tangle on her tongue as she looked around the apartment, recognizing more of her belongings now thoughtfully arranged throughout the space. "Your daughter Emma helped," Jonathan explained gently, moving to stand beside her. "We didn't take everything from your old apartment. Just the special things, the keepsakes you've mentioned. The rest is new." He gestured around the space. The kitchen with modern appliances, designed for ease of use, the bathroom with safety features discreetly integrated into the stylish design, the bedroom visible through an open door with a comfortable bed, perfectly made up with what he knew were her own cherished quilts. "I don't understand," Mrs. Abernathy said, her voice barely above a whisper as she slowly lowered herself into her mother's rocking chair, seeming to need its familiar support in this moment of overwhelming surprise. "This apartment, all of this, what does it mean?" The tremble in her hands clasped tightly in her lap revealed both her emotional state and her growing comprehension of what Jonathan was trying to tell her. Jonathan knelt beside the rocking chair, gently taking one of her weathered hands in his. "This is yours, Mrs. Abernathy," he said softly but clearly. "The apartment, the furnishings, everything. It's been purchased and fully paid for. No mortgage, no rent, just monthly maintenance fees, which have been covered for the next 20 years. He squeezed her hand gently as her eyes widened in disbelief. "You don't need to clean tables anymore. You don't need to worry about making rent or choosing between medicine and groceries." Tears spilled freely down Mrs. Abernathy's cheeks now, her free hand coming up to cover her mouth as she shook her head in disbelief. "Johnny, I can't possibly accept this," she protested, though her eyes continued to move around the beautiful space with visible longing. "This must have cost, I can't even imagine. It's too much, far too much." The struggle between overwhelming gratitude and fierce pride was evident in every line of her face, in the tremble of her voice. "Do you remember what you told me when I was 8 and Bobby Wilson down the street broke my model airplane?" Jonathan asked, still holding her hand. "You said that when someone does something kind for us, refusing their kindness can be as hurtful as ignoring someone's pain. You said that sometimes the most gracious thing we can do is simply say thank you and accept the gift with an open heart." He smiled gently at her stunned expression. "I was listening, Mrs. Abernathy. I remembered." "But this isn't a model airplane, Johnny," she whispered, gesturing around the apartment. This is life-changing. I can't possibly repay you." Jonathan shook his head firmly, his expression serious now. "This isn't a loan, Mrs. Abernathy. This is a gift, one that doesn't begin to repay what you gave me as a child. The security, the consistency, the love when my parents were building their careers and often absent. You shaped who I became, and now God has blessed me with resources I never imagined having. Please, let me use them in a way that honors what you did for me." Mrs. Abernathy's resistance slowly crumbled as Jonathan led her through the apartment, showing her the thoughtful details that had been incorporated with her specific needs in mind. The walk-in shower with a built-in seat, the kitchen cabinets that pulled down for easier access, the security system with emergency call buttons in each room, the small desk near the window, where she could write letters to her grandchildren or simply enjoy the morning light while reading her beloved books. "There's one more thing," Jonathan said as they completed the tour, guiding her toward a door they hadn't yet opened. "This second bedroom. Well, Emma and I thought it might serve a special purpose." He opened the door to reveal a cheerfully decorated room with a comfortable daybed, a small bookshelf filled with children's titles, and a toy chest colorfully painted with scenes from fairy tales. "For when your grandchildren visit," he explained softly. "The building has a playground just behind it, and there's a wonderful ice cream shop on the corner." This final touch broke through the last of Mrs. Abernathy's resistance, a sob escaping her as she pressed both hands to her heart. "My grandchildren," she whispered, moving slowly into the room and touching the soft bedding, the carefully selected books, the child-sized table and chairs in the corner. "They could stay with me here. They could finally visit, and I'd have somewhere proper to keep them, somewhere safe and comfortable. Emma is flying in this weekend," Jonathan revealed, leaning against the doorframe as he watched the emotions play across Mrs. Abernathy's face. "She's bringing Sophie and Abigail with her, a surprise visit to help you settle in. Michael and his family are planning to come next month, once the school year ends. They're all so excited, Mrs. Abernathy. They've been worried about you for so long, but didn't know how to help in a way you'd accept." Mrs. Abernathy turned to him, tears streaming unchecked down her face now, no longer fighting the emotion that overwhelmed her. "Why?" she asked simply, the single word carrying the weight of so many questions. "Why would you do all this for me? It's been so many years since I was your nanny. You've surely had many more important people in your life since then." Jonathan moved to her side, gently leading her back to the living room and helping her settle again into the rocking chair that had been her mother's before her. "Important people, yes," he acknowledged, sitting on the couch across from her. "But foundational people? There haven't been many of those, Mrs. Abernathy." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Do you remember when my father got that big promotion when I was about 6, and suddenly both my parents were traveling all the time?" Mrs. Abernathy nodded, her hands finally stilling in her lap as memories overtook emotion. "You went through that phase of hiding their shoes before trips," she recalled with a watery smile, "as if they couldn't leave without their shoes." The shared memory hung between them, rich with understanding of a child's desperate attempts to keep his parents home. "You were so lonely then, despite all your brave talk about being a big boy." "You were my constant," Jonathan said simply. "When everything else in my young life felt unstable and confusing, you were there. Same rules, same routines, same unlimited patience with all my questions and fears." His voice softened with the weight of memory. "You remember my nightmares after my grandfather died? You sat in that very rocking chair beside my bed for 3 nights straight, just so I wouldn't wake up alone and scared." Mrs. Abernathy's eyes filled again, her hand reaching out instinctively as if to comfort the child he had been. "You were such a sensitive little boy, felt everything so deeply." Her voice carried the warmth of fond remembrance. "Those nightmares broke my heart, you trying so hard to be brave during the day, then crying out in the night." She sighed softly. "Children need consistency, need to know someone's always there, especially during big changes." "Exactly," Jonathan agreed earnestly. "And that's what I'm trying to explain. You were that rock-solid foundation during some of my most formative years. The values you modeled, the stories you told, the little rituals that made each day feel safe and predictable when other things weren't, all of that shaped who I became." He gestured around the apartment. "This isn't charity, Mrs. Abernathy. This is acknowledgement of a debt that can never truly be repaid." Mrs. Abernathy shook her head slightly, though her resistance was weakening. "I was just doing my job, Johnny. I was paid to take care of you." The statement held no bitterness, just a practical assessment from a woman who had always taken her responsibilities seriously. "Your parents were good employers. They paid me fairly for the work I did." Her fingers traced the familiar pattern of the rocking chair's armrest, a gesture Jonathan remembered from childhood when she was thinking deeply. "You went far beyond just doing your job," Jonathan countered gently. "You loved me, genuinely loved me. when you had no obligation to do so. His voice grew thick with emotion. Do you think I didn't notice how you slipped money from your own paycheck to replace the baseball I lost after Dad had lectured me about responsibility? Or how you spent your day off taking me to the museum when Mom had to cancel our planned trip? Or how you kept every single art project I made, no matter how messy or ridiculous? A soft blush colored Mrs. Abernathy's cheeks at these specific memories that revealed how closely he had been paying attention, even as a child. I still have some of those art projects, she admitted with a small laugh. That clay handprint you made in kindergarten, the macaroni frame for Mother's Day that you decided to give to me instead. Her eyes took on a faraway look. Children are such gifts, even the ones not born to you can become part of your heart if you let them. That's exactly it, Jonathan said softly. You let me into your heart when you didn't have to, and it made all the difference in my life. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn object, a tiny wooden cross on a simple cord, clearly old and well